My name is DrRic Seguil.
And action. Hey, Jay had a... This is Kirk again.
Stress and nothing to cope with.
And action. Hey everyone, it's DrRic from Herbal 411. And Christine had a question about, does stress make me fat? Or, not me, but, well, it would, but does stress make anybody fat? And I think there is a validity in explaining all the details and getting into the weeds. But if this is the first time you're finding me, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below and the alert button to find out when I do new videos. And practice calm. Calm. You should check out those of you who are still watching, you should check out my video, DrRic Tutorial 478 Breathing, because there is great value in learning to have a calming practice. I usually will tell most of my patients that one of the things I find missing with a lot of 40 to 50-year-olds, actually everybody, 20s, 40 to 50s, or 60 to 70s. My 60 to 70s usually get a little bit of calming practice. They found their nugget and they just have to develop it. 20-year-olds, usually not. 40 to 50 are too stressed out and can't even fathom it, but I think there is value. I'm going to explain it now. So it is a great question too, because it's very hard to sell anybody, I think you should exercise. That's easy, right? I think you should lose weight. That's easy too. Well, it's easy to say it, hard to do it. But for me to say, you need a calming practice. Oh, I'm not stressed out. And I think either my patients don't recognize it, unless they're in their 70s, and then there might not be a stress except for all the medical problems, or it's just, or they're really stressed out. So I'm going to go through the physiology of this, and hopefully you can follow, but I will tell you in the end why stress makes people fat. I mean, it does a whole bunch of other things, including turning on cancer, bringing on heart attack, bringing on stroke. But in the lower acuity, 30 to 40-year-old, it does make you gain weight, or at least hunt for food. And why? Well, this is a picture of the brain, and the brain is broken down into, well, it's not broken down, but one of the master cylinders or master organs or glands of the brain is called the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is what happens or what turns on when you feel fear or when you are threatened. Fight or flight is what gets turned on, but the hypothalamus is the first gland that starts to work. We'll talk about the pituitary too, because the hypothalamus turns on the pituitary, but the hypothalamus more directly, and then the pituitary is a gland that sends out hormones in the body. Instantaneous results if the pituitary sends out glands, but the hypothalamus also sends through electronics or nerve conduction little impulses that go down the spine, from the spine into the peripheral nerves to stimulate these things. These two things are things that sit on top of the kidney. These two are the kidneys. This is the urinary tract system. This is a bladder. So those of you who know your anatomy, these two kidneys have two things on top of them, which are, I kind of give it away, the adrenal medulla. So the adrenal glands, the medulla in particular is the red part here, but the adrenal glands are glands that take care of sodium, potassium, fight or flight. The medulla in particular has a direct connection via nerves to the hypothalamus and the brain. Just make it the brain, okay? The brain has a way of turning on impulse to get us out of a situation of danger or death. And that's a great built-in mechanism. Birds fly away, some opossums play dead, animals attack and defend, I should say. But that's fight or flight. And one of the pathways is that direct brain to adrenal medulla turn on. When the impulses get to the adrenal medulla, the medulla is important because it secretes a couple of things: epinephrine, norepinephrine, and adrenaline. I think you know those things because if you've ever watched an ER show, when somebody's dying or 000, no pulse, no breathing, no blood pressure, somebody will take a big fat needle and stick it into the chest, like Pulp Fiction, John Travolta. He got a needle and put it into Arquette's chest. That's because she was squeezing epinephrine into the chest, into the heart, to get going again. So the same thing happens naturally, not to the same amount as a syringe in the case of a dead heart, but enough to get us going, get the blood pressure going, get the heart rate going, get breathing going so that we can run from danger or fight and defend. So those three hormones, noradrenaline, adrenaline, and epinephrine, can really be used properly. Like when I go work out, I use my music, turn on Metallica, I get psyched up and get guided imagery to lift or do my resistance exercise and make it for the 20 minutes. Be short of breath and then near collapse and then get home. But if I was going to be in a fight or a fire occurred, or back in the old days, whenever there was a code in the hospital, that beeper would go off, you'd hear a code on the loudspeaker, everything would stop, and then the built-in reaction would be run to the code and save a life. Well, it's useful in that regard, right? But unfortunately, some people, because of excessive amounts of hyperstimulation of this hypothalamus, they get irritated, say, from somebody cutting them off. A truck driver, one of my FedEx guys told me that he tries to stay calm, but I think it was every 5 minutes, somebody would try to get in front of him, cut him off. And I said, how do you tolerate that? Or how do you tolerate traffic if you have a delivery? And I don't know what he said, but so I think that's why he was overweight. I think that's why a lot of truck drivers are overweight. Not only that, but you're sedentary. But anyway, the problem is with smaller stressors, and we all have smaller stressors, whether it's being late for work, having coffee that's cold instead of hot, being shortchanged by accident when you go buy something from Target, getting frustrated because you heard news that the Cubs lost again, so there are small stressors. Or here, getting a bad report card, getting turned down by your favorite opposite sex person. So those things are certainly mini stressors. It's not like fight or flight, but some people with enough of those mini stressors throughout the whole day will turn on the adrenal medulla just like they had a stressful or fight or flight experience. And these hormones, either they're there in your bloodstream or they're not in your bloodstream. So even if you have tiny stressors here, as long as these guys are on, they turn on and cause high blood pressure, fast heart rate, hypertension. And you would think that that's okay. So I'm going to get to the spoiler of why does that make you fat in a second. But that will make you hypertensive. That will probably screw up your cholesterol, and it will give you a very fast heart rate and probably have you not sleep properly. The other thing that these fight or flight hormones don't allow you to do is to think with your frontal brain. So there's parts of the brain that are important for conceptualizing, problem solving, emotional bonding, and those are not considered important when you're in fight or flight. So what happens is your brain gets tunnel vision. It can't solve problems. It can't really think conceptually. It goes back to a very basic survivability. So that's why people, when they're stressed out, do poorly on tests. So the idea is, so already you're seeing that with big stressors, you'll run from danger. A whole bunch of smaller stressors, you are going to have diseases because you're going to be thinking, run from danger, run from danger, run from danger all the time. It won't be of a significant magnitude, but it'll be enough to give you the beginnings of hypertension, difficulty with stopping your eating, hunting for bad foods, problem solving and failing. So now how does that translate to fat or weight gain? Let's go further. So I mentioned that those things aren't healthy for living to 100. And this is all for longevity. At least I try to get my patients to live on and not have any diseases. Longevity is the main name of the game. The problem will be that most Americans are so screwed up that you can't even think about longevity because the fact that we're living so lousy now. I mentioned my 20-year-olds who probably aren't having any problems but want to live a healthier life later. I have my 40 to 50-year-olds who are not feeling anything, but they're usually overweight and have an accumulated amount of data blood testing in the hospital that shows disease is here. They're not feeling anything, but disease is here. So usually they'll come to see me. The vast majority of my patients are that age group, and they'll come to see me because they're just tired of taking so many pills. Because the pills are causing side effects to take care of something that they don't even feel: a high cholesterol, a high blood pressure, a bad sugar or glucose level. So those pills will be initiated even if you don't feel anything. And then there's a 70-year-olds, 60 to 70-year-olds that actually feel it. They have disease manifestation, and they're on a shitload of blood pressure medicines, cholesterol medicines, glucose medicines, sleep medicines, prostate medicines, hormone medicines. It's just so messed up when you're in your 60s and 70s. You're so deep into the crap that it almost seems irreversible. But it's not. It's not, because I think there's ways out of it, but you got to be patient. And that's why, going back to the 20-year-olds, if they could see where the 70-year-olds now, their grandparents are now, they might be able to avoid that. And again, it's just empowerment by avoiding some stuff and adding on a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So let's get back to this. So the other thing that happens with the stress or fight or flight is pituitary turns on. Pituitary is a gland that secretes hormone. Hormone goes throughout the bloodstream and ends up taking care of the same organ, the adrenal gland. It stimulates the adrenals, but it stimulates the cortex, or the outside of the adrenal glands. So the adrenal medulla is the one that gets stimulated by a nerve impulse really quick. But for long-term stress, those mini stressors, the cortex gets stimulated more by hormone secretion from the pituitary, particularly the anterior pituitary. So what happens with the blood from the hormones in the bloodstream reach from the pituitary into the cortex of the adrenal is that it stimulates the adrenal cortex. It stimulates these three things here. So this is a breakdown of the adrenal cortex. There's three layers. The most important one is the middle layer, fasciculata. The fasciculata, they all have their own things that they do, but the fasciculata in particular secretes glucocorticoids. Glucocorticoids like cortisol. Most of you that have watched my videos know that cortisol is a concern. You have to have some cortisol. In fact, in the morning, you're supposed to have a little bit of cortisol, level of 20, and it's supposed to progressively go down over the course of several hours, usually by half by lunchtime, and then slowly taper off by dinner and sleep. And then melatonin takes over, and the same diurnal kind of reaction. So the objective is, with a stressful event, the hormones secreted to stimulate the adrenal cortex secrete all three layers, but in particular, you get the release of cortisol. And cortisol has a way. Cortisol, if you follow the traditional doctor or the alternative medicine doctor, they'll tell you cortisol is bad. And in a way it is. Too much cortisol all day long is not good. Not enough cortisol usually means you're burned out or adrenally insufficient or fatigued, and that's not good either. It's supposed to be high in the morning, decreased by lunchtime, off by sleep time. But if it's high all day long, this thing will not be able to secrete all your life at that speed. It's going to burn out. Like Wilson put in his book, he's a naturopathic doctor I met in Florida. He put in his book that some people can suffer from adrenal fatigue, which I do believe in. And but even before you get fatigued, you'll have constant spikes of this fasciculata, and the fasciculata makes cortisol. Cortisol, what does that do? It stimulates the liver to make more glycogen, just in case there's a stressor and we have to get some fuel to go. So it increases glucose stores. It increases gluconeogenesis, or the breakdown of protein and some fats to make more glucose. Again, more fuel, just in case you have to call on it. Again, for the fight or flight, because if you have your high blood pressure, if your heart rate is high, your blood pressure is high, you're breathing fast, you're going to need fuel. So the liver is told the same to support everything else. The liver is told, let's get the fuel going. So usually the liver keeps a little bit of glycogen in it for like an hour of cardiovascular work, and then it burns out. That's what that old concept of carb loading was about. But sometimes when you have the excessive amount of stress, a little bit of stress all day long, you'll have the development of the glucose being at higher levels than normal, And you'll also have a wearing away or eating away of muscle thickness, muscle fibers. It's protein catabolism. We don't want that. We don't want sarcopenia. Not at any age. Sarcopenia usually happens when you get older or before you have osteoporosis. But because of constant fight or flight, you're actually going to break down muscle to put the fuel in the system. And the problem is there's going to be so much glucose from the cortisol stimulating the liver that you'll have spillover. And the liver can only store so much. When it continues to get signals to make, it spills out of the container into the bloodstream. When you have excessive amounts of glucose in the bloodstream, that's insulin resistance. Insulin resistance will lead you to digest and utilize fuel improperly. And that is how we end up obese. Too much fuel in the system gives the entire body the signal that you're supposed to, number one, be ready for death or running, and also that you have to deal with all this fuel, this excessive fuel going around. And having glucose in the system all the time is not healthy. And that's what usually leads to insulin resistance. When you have insulin resistance, you crave more. When you crave more, you usually crave the bad things because you can't make proper decision making. You can't think, oh, I have to have salad and healthy eating, mostly plants, maybe ketosis type eating. You can't think that when the brain's in fight or flight. It's going to make you think carbohydrate and fast carbohydrate. And where you go for carbohydrates, fast food or grocery store. And if you've ever seen the checkout lines in your fast food or grocery store, the easiest access things when you come into the store, when you check out, are usually those things that are the nastiest for you. But they're easy to grab and they're very enticing. In fact, I think that the candy aisle, right now it's going to be Easter, so every place that is around is going to have candy in the entry level, in the checkout area. It's going to be candy everywhere. And that's just going to screw you up. I mean, sucrose, I did a video on sugar and its byproducts and how it makes you fat. So again, if your brain isn't thinking right, it's going to make you hunt for that. If you're constantly secreting a ton of glucose, it's going to make the metabolics of the body a little bit poorer. When the metabolics don't work right, you can't digest that stuff, your fuel gets utilized, it doesn't get utilized because you're not really running from anything. You're sitting there working your cubicle or driving, and you have all this glucose around. Well, the glucose has to go somewhere, so it usually gets stored in fat. So the fat stores get bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's the reveal. So that is how things happen as far as gaining weight from stress. Now, how do we reverse it? That's a more complicated thing. I'll probably do another video, but I have done a couple of mindfulness videos. The idea is if you can beat the way the brain reacts to stress, then you can stop this reaction. You'll stop the impulse to the medulla. You'll stop the impulse to the cortex by hormone. You'll stop it because you'll just have so much. The reveal for this, the spoiler for this is that when you have a relaxation practice embedded in your 24-hour day, 5 to 30 minutes twice a day, then it makes you impervious to, it actually will help you to not secrete this hormone, not stimulate the adrenal medulla, not stimulate the cortex, and keep everything calm. But it takes a lot of practice to have and fine-tune or dial in your mindful practice or relaxation practice. And everybody has a different one. I like listening to Deepak and Oprah and guided imagery. And if I'm deep into it, I can meditate using my mantra over and over again. Some people can actually sit on a park bench, use nature therapy. That works too to decrease inflammatory markers. It's called Japanese forest bathing. I'll put a video down there. Sometimes yoga practitioners will be able to, by the end of 60 minutes, get to a level where they're just really relaxed during the last pose. But for those of you who are thinking that you have a relaxation practice because you do yoga, it's supposed to be twice a day. I really challenge anybody to do a class, 1 hour class twice a day. That would be great, but it's just not practical. I think 1 hour twice a week would be fine, and then on your own twice a day with some form of practice. And if you don't have a practice, get a coach. I like the psychologists in my area. They can design, there's talk time too, positive psychology, but the good ones can design a relaxation practice for you, or Dr. Nicole Parmalee teaches breath exercise because she's also a yoga teacher. She's in Geneva. So there's ways to develop that, to turn off the stress response if you have a lot of it. If you don't have a lot of it, then you're probably ignoring it because all of us have a stress response. And even if you don't have all the turn-ons of these pathways I just mentioned, what the heck, it's not going to hurt to do a relaxation practice anyway. Lowers blood pressure, helps you stop craving. So either way, I'd say this is what happens when you're stressed or when stress is unanswered and you have a weight issue. If you want to try to reverse it, check out the links down below. Otherwise, Christine, hopefully this gives you a little bit of an empowerment on the value of calming practice. And don't feel so bad, but if we add that as an ingredient to our recipe, it'll work eventually. You just have to go through a couple of different dishes till we get to that sustainable, healthy lifestyle change. Please subscribe down below, and thank you for watching up until this point. Otherwise, pass this on to other people that you think are a little stressed out or a little heavy, and maybe we can all benefit from it. See you in the clinic.